James Whitaker, cinematographer for Hawkeye. This reunited you with the directors Bert and Birdie. You guys did Troop Zero together. So what was it like working together again with them and on such a widely different project?
It was awesome. I mean, they're the best. They're just so much fun to work with and so well prepared as directors. Just like they're incredible people and they're incredible directors. So it was like, just win-win all the
Mhm.
way.
So when you came on board, what were your initial discussions like?
Yeah, it was fun because I had already worked on a Marvel show. I shot a large visual effects unit on Captain America Civil War. And I think for them, it was nice to be able to come back to me. We already had that established relationship. And then to present me to I think to the studio was comfortable because they knew I'd already worked in that sort of way. But like right off the bat, we got to work on some of the more challenging bits of the show, like some of the bigger action sequences was kind of what I was thrown into right from the start. Like even before my deal was done, I think even before I was officially signed on, we were talking about some of the harder things that we were going to need to pull off.
So they told you off the bat, it wasn't like a surprise that like, oh, by the way, you're gonna have to do this like huge car chase.
The car chase was, I think, the first thing we talked about for sure, because we knew it would take, most of prep and probably 3 or 4 months of shooting to actually work out the details to get it ready before we could actually start shooting it. I think we started talking about the car chase kind of in the beginning of September, and I think we started shooting the car chase in January or February, and then we did some of the most difficult parts of it in late February, maybe early March, which is the single shot of the car chase at the beginning of the sequence.
Mhm. I mean, I really think that is like the piece de resistance of the whole sequence, like the 360 oneers. So I know you guys had to test out a bunch of rigs. So what went into all that, like the logistics of it?
Yeah, it was a lot. It was basically from the time I arrived in Atlanta, my first meeting with my key grip, his name is Kirk Cornerman. He's an absolute genius. Was about this oneer that we knew we were going to have to pull off, and right off the bat, we started pitching sort of different ideas of what equipment it might take to do it. We knew from the beginning that we would need a large vehicle, so that became an early conversation point with all departments. Is that this could not be some small little car to pull off this shot, because if we were going to do it practically, a full size camera would need to fit inside the back of the vehicle and be able to move around sort of freely. The idea was that the camera would have a handheld feel, but we quickly realized it would be impossible to do it as a single shot with an actual cameraman carrying the camera. So it became actually two pieces. One piece, sort of the A side of the shot, which gets you through like probably 8/10 of the shot, probably 3 of the 4 rotations, is a camera mounted down through the ceiling, and rotating remotely and being operated by camera operators and focus pullers remotely outside the vehicle. And this vehicle is driving down a real road. And then the B side of the shot, and in between A and B, there's a stitch point with visual effects. So there is one stitch point in there. We actually put a camera operator in the back seat of the vehicle to sort of do the last bit of the rotation and then hand off the camera. That's really neat. Hand off the camera to another camera operator so that he could go out the window with Haley as she went out the window and sat on the side of the car. So that is a real camera operator. But all these, that's just a small part of it, because it was not only was it figuring out the correct camera rig, and of that we probably tested 5 or 6 different remote heads. We tried different cameras, for different sizes. We tried different lenses, and each time we did this, we had to ship those pieces of equipment in from different parts of the country, and so it wasn't a cheap thing to do. But we also had to figure out, how do we mount this car, and how do we have the actors appear to be driving it, but not driving it, because it's not safe to do that. So we put this car on basically a tow vehicle, and the driver of that vehicle is actually outside of this hero car, sitting on a truss about 6 feet or 7 feet above, maybe about 2 feet above the top of the picture car, and he's up there driving this car remotely. and and just flying through the streets of Atlanta, which I think was a lot of fun for the actors. But yeah, it took months and months and months of planning. And there were a lot of conversations about, should we do this on stage on a blue screen? I think everybody knew that just the R&D, the research alone, trying to figure out which rigs to use was going to be an expensive proposition. Then you have to plan, how do you close down, 15 city blocks in Atlanta and actually drive this safely with, many cops and, a lot of permitting and, months of planning just for that. So it was a big undertaking to actually do it real. So there were, ideas that maybe this could be a lot easier to do on stage, but I think all of us were, including, the people that had the idea that maybe we should shoot on stage, were a little skeptical of, it feeling real with, bodies, the energy of the car driving and being pushed around inside of a car, and also the buildings looking real outside. And it proved to be a lot better. I can tell you the actors just had so much fun with it. I think that alone for their performances was a really tremendous.
It seemed like they did. So you said Haley actually hung out the window.
Yeah, with the car going 40
how
miles.
many of their own stunts did they do? Like how much driving at all did Jeremy do?
You mean during the winter?
Yeah. Or like during the whole sequence, really, like to the bridge and everything?
Yeah, very little. Very little, next to none. Like all the stuff of the actors actually driving, once we get past the single shot, the oneer, then it becomes much more traditional in terms of, how do we make this camera look real? And we also had a tremendous amount of work to do. So we did decide to do a lot of those shots of Jeremy and Haley, actually driving against blue screen. So that was a really fun rig. The special effects department basically created a hockey table, and they basically floated these cars. And so you'd have two cars side by side, and the special effects team put air below them so that they could just float an inch off, half an inch off the ground, and then people could push and bang them against each other. So it was quite incredible. Sorry about that.
No problem. That's awesome. But I think it was the correct call to do it practically. And it felt visceral and immersive. And I do love how the 360 oneer in the backseat, it's smooth, but you still get the shakiness and the bumpiness of what it feels like to be in a car, like speeding down 100 miles an hour. So was that hard to kind of find the right calibration of that, the smoothness of the camera and the bumpiness of being in a car?
Yeah, I mean, whenever you're doing a real car driving, even if you hard mount the camera, there's going to be a little bit of vibration happening. And we tested that, and it was not the right vibe. And especially knowing that at the end, there was going to be a handheld handoff out the window. So we wanted the whole beginning of the shot to have that same sort of handheld vibe, but not too handheld, not too crazy. So we figured out a system where we could have the remote head and the camera hanging from inside the car, but also have a camera operator actually hold a unit handheld remotely. And the handheld vibe that the camera operator was holding the camera with gave the camera inside the car a handheld vibe remotely. So that was a lot of fun. I mean, that was just a lot of even more testing.
So how many takes did you guys end up doing of that then?
I don't know, but my guess is we did about 6 or 7 of each. There's 2 parts to the shot. So
yeah, that's probably, I don't know if I was expecting more or not, but maybe you guys were just testing so frequently that you were able to nail it in under 10. So
yeah. And it was really, not only did we do a ton of testing, but the stunt department tested all of that in a parking lot, a month beforehand, maybe, where they took this vehicle and they took all the other vehicles that were going to be driving alongside of it, and they were all working it out, recording video and bringing it back and presenting it to our director. Well, this worked, this didn't work. So all of that was pre-planned. None of it was really figured out on the day. It's just too big of a thing. But it was a block. And Kevin Feige happened to be there on that day, so it was, he was just loving it. And every time because it was real, and this is something we talk about a lot, is when you shoot something on blue screen, it's difficult for the actors to feel like they're in an environment. But every time we did a take, the camera would be, 2 minutes away, and then it would come back to base camp for us to review the shot and talk about it and do any tweaks. And every time the camera came back and the car came back, Jeremy and Haley would be like leaning out the window, just hooting and hollering because they were just having so much fun. Like they were like, "This is the best roller coaster we've ever
the
had."
kids again, right? Yeah. Well, another sequence I really loved in this episode, the third episode, is the beginning, when we see the flashback of when Ronan kills Maya's dad. And I love the way you shot it because it's from Maya's perspective and it's like following her outside the building, and you never really go into like the fight between Ronan and her dad and like, his gang. You just see it through the windows, and then it's like shadowy. And the style like echoes the Yakuza fight in Endgame, but it still feels very menacing in that way because you don't actually see the fight directly. So was that your goal, and how did you guys shoot all that?
Yeah, I think that was the goal. We talked a lot about that we didn't want to overcover what was happening inside the space and not have it be part of Maya's world and part of her perspective, because this is a horror for her, and it's also a major motivation for her character and what happens in this Hawkeye series, and her sort of bloodlust for revenge, and she needs to redeem, sort of close a chapter of her life, which is quite brutal. And so, yeah, we talked a lot about that. We talked about color temperatures. We did talk a lot about the fact that Maya, when she sees her father, killed inside of the auto shop, that we talked a lot about what perspective it should be done by. And the camera, right from the beginning, we knew the camera had to be with her. And, Bert and Bertie and myself, that's kind of our sensibility anyway, is to put who is the central character of the scene, whose story are we trying to tell, and let's see it from that person's perspective. And so, and we talked a lot about, the color temperatures of light that we would use inside that space, the mix of reds and cyans and ambers. It sort of gives it kind of a bruisy complexity. And it also had this sort of slight element of a memory. And it was a lot of fun to shoot. We talked about doing it as a single shot originally. But I think we all knew that more importantly than capturing it and trying to choreograph the single shot was to get the beginning of it so that we could see what Maya witnessed, and then, through other small cuts that were clever, get her to the most important part of it, which is her having a conversation with her father as he's dying. Mm-hmm. And I love the subtle reference that they put in where he puts his hand on her face and he's got his blood on her face, and that's the Echo character signature.
Yeah.
I'm sure the Marvel fans loved.
they clocked all of that stuff. So
I'm sure.
Well, I love that that fight because it's in such stark contrast to the style of a Clint fight, which we see also in that episode in the KB Toys store. And like the Clint fights feel more typical of an MCU like action sequence, and it's slightly comedic, like when he falls into the ball pit. So what was your approach to shooting the Clint fights?
I think it was kind of more of the same. It was a lot of planning, no question. And he had a lot of input on how he wanted to do some of the moves. And it was a load of training, stunt training. The Toy Story fight with Clint, and in general, all of the sequences where our characters are fighting just take a ton of planning between stunts and visual effects and art department and camera and the directors. And the one thing I can say about the Clint stuff is the Clint fights is that a lot of it is pre-planned by Heidi Moneymaker and her team, the stunt team. And sometimes that involves them sort of shooting kind of a stunt viz where they create the action with notes from the director or notes from me. And they videotape it and then they bring it back to us to sort of critique and add to, what about this, try this. Other times they'll bring us in on a some time off some day before work or on a weekend, and we'll get with them and we'll actually talk through the action and videotape it ourselves, so that we're much more part of the planning of what's going to happen. We did that on the rooftop sequence fight in episode 4. Spent a couple hours planning with them, and then they continue to level everything up.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, it takes a lot of planning with regard to what you need for cameras and what's first unit going to shoot, what's second unit going to shoot. Because on all these Marvel things, there's never just one cinematographer.
Yeah, for sure. I also love the lightness and the darkness of the series. Like obviously a lot of the fights are at night or in the dark or in the shadows, but there was like one scene in the 3rd episode that I thought was really striking, and it's in Kate's aunt's apartment after the next day, in the kitchen, and there's this like really nice like beam of light like coming in through the window on Clint. And I thought that was also a nice contrast to all the scenes in the toy store when it's like, a rundown building and like the windows are covered up and it's dirty and the light is obscured. So can you talk about getting those shots and like playing with light on the show?
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of what was really fun for us. Is the series takes place in New York, which I think was a great choice, because not only, you know, it's pretty much a Christmas story. They go to New York to watch a musical, that hopefully then a couple hours later will be on a plane and back to their family to all be together for Christmas. So the whole thing happens at Christmas. And that's sort of the goal, the sort of pushing goals. You have the time clock of getting home in time for Christmas to be as together as a family. And in New York, we all know that New York's quite magical as far as like the Christmas lights and the Christmas spirit that happens around the city. So you have like one side of this, it's this like glorious, like Christmas lights everywhere and feeling magical. And then you have the underbelly world of, dark alleyways and dark rooftops, which we talked a lot about, being this like sort of Christmas light, sort of happiness and lightness, and then these sort of darker, bruisey tones of cyan and amber, street lights that, also create complexity on characters' faces, like Clint's face, because he's bruised and damaged goods in this series, right? His family disappeared for 5 years, and he became, a pretty menacing character as the Ronin, and kind of went rogue and started creating his own justice, and that's gotten him back into this place. At the same time, he lost his best friend Natasha, and so he's bruised good. So these mixing colors on people's faces really was a lot of fun. And then you can go back and have it be lighter. New York in the day, you wake up and you have winter light when sometimes it's sunny in New York in the winter. And so, yeah, we just created these little pieces of light to have a contrast between the real dark scenes and the lighter scenes, where we're getting to know the characters, and we're less shadowy on the faces, so that you can sort of see the vulnerability, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it feels like because it's a new day, so it's like he's starting anew again, so new opportunities to take them down and everything. Well, you have done, I think, second unit on Captain America Civil War, right? That was your previous Marvel gig. So
Yeah.
is there any other Marvel property or superhero you'd like to work on?
That's a good question. Interesting. All of them.
Oh,
All of
yes.
them. No,
Just
I
lock
would.
you up for every single one.
I'd love to shoot another Marvel project. I have really a lot of fun every time. I think they do such a good job of character development, which is one of my favorite things, is shooting really intimate scenes with just two people talking. Like I love photographing faces and getting into the intimate scenes. It feels more like a regular conventional drama, right?
Mhm.
And then there's the comedy side of it, which is really fun. And then of course there's the action. So it's always quite a lot of fun.
Awesome. All right, James. Well, it's great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time.